The confrontation with Emma felt like a hollow victory. I had finally confronted the truth, but it didn't bring the closure I hoped for. Instead, I was left with a gaping wound, one that throbbed with betrayal and the weight of shattered trust. It wasn't just about Emma and Dan, it was about the life I thought I had built, a life I now realized had been crumbling for far longer than I had noticed. After the initial confrontation, things spiraled. Emma moved into the spare room, and our interactions were cold, clipped. We didn't fight, not really. The kids kept things civil, and we both tried to maintain a facade of normalcy for their sake. But every look, every awkward silence, reminded me of the enormity of what had happened. Then, one evening, Emma asked to talk. I dreaded these conversations, the ones where she tried to explain herself, to justify what couldn't be justified. But this time was different. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice low, barely audible. I could see the tension in her shoulders. The way her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. I sat across from her, feeling the familiar bitterness well up inside me. "What now?" I asked, my voice more tired than angry. "It's about Dan," she hesitated, and I felt my heart drop. I didn't want to hear more about him, about what they'd done. But I had to know. "What about him?" She looked down, biting her lip as though she was afraid to speak. "It wasn't just a one-time thing," she said finally. "It started, months ago. It's been going on for almost a year." The words hit me like a physical blow. A year. A whole year of lies. I had suspected it had been more than just a brief fling, but hearing the truth, knowing how long I had been living in the dark, it was too much. I stood up abruptly, unable to sit there any longer. "A year?" I echoed, pacing the room. "You've been lying to me for a year?" Emma didn't respond immediately, tears brimming in her eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered. "Dan and we got close. You were working late a lot, the kids were getting older, and I felt like we were drifting apart. So you decided the best way to fix that was to sleep with my best friend?" The sarcasm in my voice was sharp, and I could see her wince. "No," she said quickly. "It wasn't about that. I didn't plan it. I never wanted to hurt you, but it just happened." I hated that phrase. It just happened. Like she had no control over it, like she was some passive participant in her own betrayal. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to lash out, but all I could feel was a deep, aching numbness. "You had a choice, Emma," I said finally, my voice hollow. "Every time you texted him, every time you met up with him, you had a choice. And you chose him over me. Over us." She started crying then, and I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. "Not this time." I walked out, leaving her sobbing at the kitchen table. I needed air, space, anything to escape the suffocating weight of her confession. I got in my car and drove. No destination in mind, just needing to get away. My mind raced with the implications of what she had told me. A year. That was longer than some marriages lasted. All the while, I had been the fool, blind to what was happening right under my nose. I ended up at the bar where Dan and I used to hang out. It was our spot, a place we had frequented since our 20s, back when life was simpler and our friendship was uncomplicated. As I sat at the counter, staring into a glass of whiskey, I couldn't help but wonder how long Dan had been laughing behind my back. How long had he been pretending to be my friend while stabbing me in the back? The bartender, who recognized me, asked if I was waiting for Dan. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Waiting for Dan, the man who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I shook my head and ordered another drink instead. As the night wore on, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emma. "I'm sorry. I know you hate me, but please come home. We need to talk more." I stared at the message for a long time, the words blurring as I tried to make sense of everything. Did I hate her? In that moment, I wasn't sure. I hated what she had done, hated the way she had destroyed our life, but hating her? That felt too simple, too easy. And it wasn't just her I was angry with. It was Dan, too. Dan, who had been like a brother to me. I never replied to her text. Instead, I finished my drink, left a tip, and walked out into the cold night. The weeks that followed were a blur of strained conversations and awkward silences. Emma and I decided to tell the kids we were separating. It was the hardest conversation of my life, watching their confused faces as we explained that things between their mom and me weren't working anymore. We kept it vague, of course, no need to burden them with the sordid details. They were devastated, and so was I. The look on their faces would haunt me for a long time. Emma moved out shortly after that. She rented a small apartment nearby so the kids could still spend time with both of us. On the outside, it was a civil arrangement, shared custody, polite exchanges at drop-offs. But inside, I was seething. Every time I saw her, it was a reminder of what she had done, of the life she had thrown away for a fleeting affair. And then there was Dan. I hadn't spoken to him since I found out. He had called and texted a few times, but I ignored him. What could he possibly say? There were no words that could fix this. One evening, about 2 months after Emma moved out, Dan showed up at my door. I wasn't expecting him, and seeing his face brought back a flood of emotions: anger, hurt, betrayal. I wanted to punch him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused me. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," Dan said as I stood in the doorway, blocking his path. "You got that right," I replied, my voice cold. He hesitated, looking down at his feet before meeting my gaze again. "I'm sorry, man. I know that doesn't mean much, but I am. I screwed up." "Screwed up?" I repeated, incredulous. "You didn't just screw up, Dan. You destroyed everything. You slept with my wife, for a year. Do you have any idea what that's done to me? To my family?" Dan's face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed to face you. I needed to say it to your face." I crossed my arms, trying to keep my anger in check. "Why now? Why come here now after all this time?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I guess I hoped that maybe one day we could talk. Not now, I get that, but someday. We've been friends for so long, and His voice trailed off, and he looked away, clearly struggling to find the right words. I shook my head. "Friends don't do what you did, Dan. Friends don't stab each other in the back." "I know." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I've lost everything because of this. You, my family, everything." "Good," I said sharply. "You deserve to." For a moment, we stood there in silence. The weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Then, finally, Dan turned and walked away without another word. As I watched him go, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of loss. Not just for Emma, but for the friendship that had been ruined beyond repair. As time passed, I tried to move on. I threw myself into work, spent as much time as I could with the kids, and even started seeing a therapist to try and process everything. But no matter how much distance I put between myself and the betrayal, it was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. It wasn't until a year later that I met someone new. Her name was Claire, and she was nothing like Emma. She was honest, kind, and, most importantly, she had no connection to the life I had before. We met at a local event, a mutual friends party, and we hit it off almost immediately. She knew about my past, about the divorce, and she didn't shy away from it. In fact, she encouraged me to talk about it. To let it out instead of bottling it up. With Claire, things felt easy. There were no lies, no secrets. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. We took things slow, neither of us was in a rush. But as the months went by, I found myself falling for her in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't the same kind of love I had with Emma, It was different, more mature, more grounded in reality. But even with Claire, the scars from Emma and Dan's betrayal remained. There were times when I caught myself second-guessing her, questioning her motives, wondering if she was hiding something from me. It was a habit I hated, but one I couldn't seem to shake. One night, after we had been dating for almost a year, I finally opened up to Claire about everything. Not just the betrayal, but the deeper wounds it had left, the trust issues, the fear of getting hurt again. She listened quietly, holding my hand as I spoke, and when I finished, she didn't say anything right away. "I'm not Emma," she said softly. After a long pause. "And I'm not Dan. I'm not going to hurt you like they did. But I can't promise that you won't ever get hurt again, because that's life. We get hurt. But you can't live your life waiting for the other shoe to drop." I knew she was right, but it didn't make it any easier. Trust was something that had to be rebuilt slowly, brick by brick, and I was still learning how to do that. As I sat there with Claire, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could move on from the pain. It would take time, and the scars would always be there, but I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I wasn't just the guy whose wife had cheated on him with his best friend. I was more than that, and I deserved more than that. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that things could get better. It's been 5 years since that day, and a lot has changed. Emma and I finalized the divorce not long after I started seeing Claire. She moved on too, though we rarely speak unless it's about the kids. Our relationship is cordial at best, but I've made peace with that. Some things can't be mended, and I'm okay with that now. Dan, on the other hand, disappeared from my life completely. I heard through the grapevine that he moved out of state and started a new life, but I never reached out. There's no place for him in my life anymore. Claire and I are still together, and we're happy. Happier than I ever thought I could be after everything that happened. She's been my rock, and I've worked hard to be the kind of partner she deserves. It hasn't always been easy, but we've built something strong, something real. I've learned that life isn't about avoiding pain, it's about learning to live with it, to grow from it. Betrayal may have shattered my world once, but it didn't destroy me. I rebuilt, piece by piece, and in the process, I discovered a strength I never knew I had. If there's one thing I've taken away from all of this, it's that trust, once broken, can never be fully restored. But that doesn't mean you can't learn to trust again. It's about choosing to believe in the goodness of people, even when life gives you every reason not to. And for now, that's enough.